and then we'll start at 2 after. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to NEST speaker series on preventing school shootings and mass violence with Dr. Peter Langman. Whether you're new to NEST or you've worked with us before, we're really glad to have you here today. I know I am incredibly excited for this workshop from Dr. Langman. He's just a wealth of information. A really quick overview on the history of NEST and just like where we're at and who we are before I do a little housekeeping, just to kind of let you know what's going to be coming up, how to get in contact with me if you need anything, and then I will gladly turn it over to Dr. Langman. So NEST was established in 2004 and has provided comprehensive violence prevention education in various school settings across the US. Here at NEST, we understand that we all suffer from isolation, division, fear of insignificance, and all of these things really perpetuate harm to self and others. Contemporary forms of violence prevention really failed to recognize that all forms of violence are interconnected, and that tends to render each of them a little less effective. So our innovative K-12 program, which is called You Belong Here, is transforming that status quo through the approach of our harm and violence prevention programming. We are fostering both the health and well-being of individuals, as well as the positive cultural and societal outcomes that it engenders. NEST interventions not only provide means to prevent harmful behavior, but they also nurture young people's competencies, strengths, and a sense of purpose so that they can flourish in their schools, their careers, and throughout their lives. We are building a more equitable and sustainable world through human-centered education that supports institutional change. NEST is the only program that interweaves all forms of violence to address root causes of harm. So welcome to NEST. Again, some of you are familiar with the work we do, and some of you, this may be entirely new to you, but regardless, we welcome you. And we at NEST really operate from the place that we know that happier humans do less harm. So I'm going to do some housekeeping. Like I said, before we begin, I should probably start by saying I am Amy Collins. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Education at NEST. This is a live transcription and which has been turned on for this session, so you can access those subtitles or the full transcript in the menu bar below. If you have any issues, please reach out to me and I will do my best to help you troubleshoot. We do have a Q&A session set for after the presentation, and this workshop is set to be 90 minutes long. Feel free to use the Q&A box to put any questions that you have, and we will do our best to answer everyone's questions with the allotted time. If your question doesn't get answered tonight, we'll be sending out a follow-up email in the coming days with resources and more information. So just look out for that follow-up email. So with all of that said, we are so privileged to have Dr. Peter Langman with us today. Dr. Langman is a sought-after expert in the psychology of school shooters and other perpetrators of mass violence. He has spoken on preventing school shootings at the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia, and has been hired by Homeland Security to train professionals in school safety. His research on school shooters has been cited in congressional testimony on Capitol Hill. In the wake of the Sandy Hook attack, his recommendations on preventing school shootings were presented by the CEO of the American Psychological Association to President Obama. He is the author of 3 books, Why Kids Kill, School Shooters, and Warning Signs, which are all available for purchase on his website, schoolshooters.info. You can learn more about his work and find more resources pertaining to school shootings and mass violence on that website. And I know it's on his slides as well, so you'll be able to see that. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Peter Langman.
Okay, thank you. And welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I'm just going to now share my screen and we can get started. You know, unfortunately, this topic is all too timely, having just had another school shooting 2 days ago in Nashville. This is a very complex topic. I'm going to be hitting a few different issues related to prevention, but there's so much more, as was mentioned on my website, school.info. There's a massive amount of information. So if you're interested in learning about perpetrators or threat assessment or school safety and violence prevention, there's a lot of information there. So please feel free to take a look and learn as much as you can. If you're involved in school safety, this is an issue which requires lifelong learning. We're always trying to do better, learn from the past so we can prevent more violence in the future. So having said that, I'm going to start with the issue of stereotypes and misconceptions. You know, if we get our information on school shooters from the media, we might have some misunderstandings about who they really are. And these misunderstandings, these stereotypes, can be very dangerous because we might miss warning signs when they come from people who don't look like the kinds of kids or adults who we think would commit such attacks. So there was an incident or potential incident brewing at a high school somewhere in the United States. And the administration became aware of this, and there were multiple students apparently involved in a conspiracy to commit a massacre at their school. And yet, despite the evidence, the administrators really struggled to take this seriously. They thought it must be a joke, a misunderstanding, maybe kids just talking about something that they would never do. Now, one of the administrators put it this way, referring to the students involved. He said they weren't isolated. They did not fit what we thought was the profile for the kind of student that would plan something like this. They were engaged in school. They were involved in a sport. They seemed to have a large base of friends. They even had some popularity amongst the student body. So this administrator was thinking, well, school shooters must be the misfits, the outcasts, the loners, the kids who are not engaged in school, who are not involved in a sport, who do not have friends or popularity. Common misconception. Another school administrator put it this way: they look like normal kids. I mean, literally just look like normal kids. They were on the wrestling team. Again, this focus on participation in sports. Looking at them, I will say this: when I heard it was the one kid who I had met before, I was like, no way. What? Are you kidding? No way. So you had two school administrators aware of a conspiracy to commit a massacre at their school, and they looked at the kids and they basically said, no, no way. Now, fortunately, in this case, the amount of evidence that came to light was so overwhelming that they had to take it seriously. But if that level of information had not been so readily discovered, we may have been reading about this school in the news. And that's the danger of thinking we know what a school shooter looks like, as if there's a profile, and there just is not a profile. So we need to be aware of that. And going back to this issue of they look like normal kids, he seemed to think that he would recognize a school shooter somehow by looking at him. So here's 10 young boys. If I ask you to tell me which one looks like a school shooter or which one was a school shooter, just by looking at their photos, there's no way you could identify the school shooter. And in fact, all 10 of these boys committed school shootings as young as 12 and 13 years old up to 18. But they look like normal kids. So we have to get past the idea that we could recognize a school shooter. So again, going back to the stereotype, we might think that they're always teenagers, and that's not true. About half of school shooters are adults, as was the one in Nashville 2 days ago. We tend to think of them as white males, and they often are, but also they're often not. There's more diversity among school shooters than people may be aware of. We certainly tend to think of them as loners, but very few actually are loners, and even the ones who were loners often had some level of contact with peers. We may assume they play a lot of violent video games, but so do most adolescents, certainly most boys. We may think these are the victims of bullies who get picked on so badly that they return to school with a gun to kill their tormentors. And that almost never happens. Yes, some school shooters have been bullied, but even when they're bullied, they may not seek out anyone who had harassed them. In fact, they almost never do. And some perpetrators have not been bullied at all. Some school shooters have been the bullies, the kids who threatened and intimidated and maybe beat up other kids. So the relationship between bullying and school shooting is really very complicated. So most elements of this stereotype simply are not true. And if we had to name a school shooter who fit all these elements, it would be almost impossible to do so. So what we may think of as a typical school shooter, in reality, hardly ever exists. It just does not happen this way with this type of person. So again, if we think we know what they look like, we could miss the warning signs. Now, in some cases, people have been concerned about someone who eventually went on and committed an attack. But often that's not how it plays out. So I'm going to look at a few examples here. Mitchell Johnson, who was one of the 10 boys I showed you with those photos, was a 13-year-old boy. It was commented on that some of the teachers said Mitchell Johnson was one of the nicest, quietest kids they had. He was not a troublemaker. He was not a violent, aggressive kid. He was not a kid who talked about guns and shooting and killing. In fact, one teacher said, I still cannot believe that Mitchell Johnson did that because he was the most polite student I've ever had. She would never have predicted Mitchell Johnson would have become violent. Now, Johnson committed his attack with an 11-year-old buddy, Andrew Golden. A teacher said this, If you tell me to make a list of all the boys who would do this, by no means would Andrew have been the top of the list. It's been terrifying to think that you've got this child who did this awful thing where we could tell you 20 more that we wouldn't be surprised at all to do such a thing. In other words, you could go and ask a teacher to make a list of the 20 kids most likely to become violent or commit an attack. And the teacher makes the list, and then the eventual perpetrator wasn't even in the 20 students listed. And again, that's the danger in thinking we can predict this based on something. It's often not who we think it's going to be. Finally, another case example, Michael Carneal was 14 years old, still a young boy, hadn't hit his growth spurt yet, he was 5'2", and a girl said this: Michael told us that he was going to do something that day, but he was one of those people that was just kind of little, and you just want to give him a hug because he's so funny and nice. Didn't seem like somebody that could possibly do something like that. So even when a student announces exactly what he's going to do, students often struggle to take it seriously because the student is someone they know, someone they like, doesn't seem like someone who could do that. So again, our misconceptions can really get in the way of our evaluating potential risk. And it might seem simple or obvious to say follow where the evidence leads, but as we saw with the initial high school I started talking about, where the administrators really struggled to follow where the evidence was leading them, it doesn't always play out that way. It's not always easy, or people don't always follow where the evidence leads. For example, there was an incident involving Kip Kinkle, a 15-year-old boy in 9th grade. And parents were both teachers in his school district. In fact, his father had taught at Kip's high school for 30 years, though he had recently retired. And one day, Kip was found to have a loaded gun in his locker at school. Now, the school took some action. He was both suspended, pending a formal expulsion hearing, and he was arrested and taken out in handcuffs. However, no one did any kind of investigation. No one asked Kip why he had a gun at school. No one asked any of Kip's friends if they knew why Kip had a gun at school. No one asked any of his teachers if they had seen or heard anything of concern. And what happened was, that night, Kip shot and killed both his parents and went to school the next day and shot 27 people. But why wasn't there an investigation? The assistant principal later said this: we'd crafted preventive measures, we'd created a safety wall, but the rules we set up were ignored when the moment of truth arrived. They were not followed because, quite simply, he was Kinkle. Instead of considering the fact of the gun, they considered the family of the boy who was caught with it. In other words, because the school administrators knew Kip's parents, were friends and colleagues with Kip's parents, they did not follow their own procedures, and that had deadly consequences. So we have policies and procedures for a reason. They need to be followed. Follow where the evidence leads. Now, that could become kind of tricky because the student in question could be the child of the superintendent, principal, police chief, mayor, any prominent person in the community, but we still have to follow our procedures. They're there to keep people safe. I want to talk a little bit about the distinction between response and prevention. In the wake of Columbine, schools across the nation implemented various safety procedures, such as lockdown drills and how to survive an active shooter incident and so on. And as important as these are, and they could save lives, these are things that only occur after there's already an attacker in the building. In contrast, threat assessment tries to prevent there being an attacker in the building by identifying warning signs early, evaluating, investigating the risk, and intervening as necessary. So the emergency response is the reactive piece of school safety. And as I said, that's important. But as a nation, we focus more on the reactive piece rather than the proactive piece, which is threat assessment, identifying the threat before the person with the gun shows up at the school. So in terms of where we need to do better as a nation, it's in the proactive piece in implementing threat assessment systems in our schools. Now, threat assessment will only work if people recognize and report warning signs. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about some basic warning signs. And I divide these into things people say, which include leakage and threats, and behaviors they engage in, which are referred to as attack-related behaviors. And leakage simply means when they leak their intentions, they disclose what they're planning to do. And that takes a variety of forms. Now, I have to tell you, I'm going to be quoting from the writings of school shooters. There's some profanity in there. There's some violent content. I'm just giving you a heads up because it might be the kind of thing you're not used to hearing in a professional presentation. So when we talk about leakage, as I said, that can take a variety of forms. Sometimes people simply brag about what they're going to do. They announce it to their friends. Guess what? I'm going to do a Columbine. I'm going to bring a gun to school. They're excited about it. They need to tell somebody. If students know to report those, we could prevent attacks. Sometimes the perpetrators have friends whom they don't want to get hurt, so they will tell their friends, don't come to school tomorrow, or don't be in the cafeteria on Friday, I'm bringing a gun. So they warned the people they care about to stay away so they don't get hurt. Sometimes they try to recruit someone to join the attack. Hey, this is what I'm going to do. Do you want to do it with me? The kid may say no, but if he doesn't report that, we lose an opportunity to intervene. Sometimes they make direct threats to the people they intend to kill. And no matter how explicit those threats are, often they don't get reported because no one takes them seriously. And leakage can turn up in all kinds of other ways, whether it's social media posts, putting photos or videos online, either in praise of Columbine or announcing what they're planning to do. So a good threat assessment needs to take in the internet and social media as well, because there may be critical bits of evidence there. Now, warning signs can be explicit or indirect. We're going to take a look at how explicit they can be. So Jesse Osborne told a boy, when I come back with a rifle, you're going to be the one I shoot. It can't get any more explicit than that. And even so, the boy did not report that. Now, Osborne did commit an attack. The boy he said this to survived. That's how we know about it. And something to keep in mind is when Osborne committed the attack, he was 14. When he made that threat, he may have only been 13. The perpetrators are sometimes so young that maybe it's not surprising no one takes them seriously. But that's why we need to educate our students. Whatever the threat, whatever the warning sign, even if it's someone who seems awfully young, we have to pass that along. That needs to be investigated. On more than one occasion, Luke Woodham told his ex-girlfriend he was going to put a bullet in her head. He told her directly, and she did not believe him. And on the one-year anniversary of their breakup, Luke Woodham tracked her down at school and killed her, and then opened fire at other people. Brenda Spencer, a 16-year-old girl, told someone that she was going to blow his brains out. He did not report that. Now, she did commit an attack. Again, this person who had that threat made to him was not killed. That's how we learned about this in the aftermath. Eric Hainstock talked to his friends saying the principal's not going to make it through homecoming. And tragically, Hainstock was right because he took a gun to school and killed the principal. So no matter how explicit the warning signs have been, in so many cases, no one's really taken it seriously, so it hasn't been reported. And there have been people who died as a result. Now, as I said, sometimes it's not so explicit. You may have to read between the lines a bit, but in today's world, we have to think the worst, and it has to be investigated. So Robert Flores who was actually 41 years old, back in the university after 11 years in the military, getting a nursing degree, struggling with professors in 3 classes, told one of them, "You better watch your back if you're going to flunk." Now, that's not necessarily a homicidal threat, but in case he didn't get the message, he also added, "By the way, I have a concealed carry permit." He had 3 professors living in fear for their lives. One of them was so afraid she asked her congregation to pray for her safety. At the end of the semester, when Flores did not pass his classes, he tracked down and killed those 3 professors. So even with a pretty clear threat, they did not know what to do, and nothing was done. Wayne Lowe was 18 years old. He got into a little bit of trouble, minor misconduct at the university he was attending. And he said to the administrators, "I have the power to bring the whole school down to its knees." No one asked him what he meant. A couple weeks later, he committed the attack. So again, it's not an explicit announcement, but it doesn't take a whole lot to read between the lines to see that could be a dangerous threat. Now, Valerie Fabricant was a 52-year-old college professor, and he left a voicemail on the home answering machine of a university administrator that said, "You know who I am, and you know what is going to happen." And she did know because Fabricant had been talking openly about maybe committing a shooting at his university, and eventually he did just that, brought a gun to school, to his department, and gunned down his colleagues. Now, high school student Brian Oliver told a peer, "I watched 5 movies about serial killers and thought of you the whole time." Again, that's not an explicit announcement that he's going to come and kill the boy. But sure enough, Oliver got a gun, and when he committed his attack, he went in search of the boy. Fortunately, the boy survived that incident. So sometimes the threats are so explicit, no one takes them seriously. Other times they're implied. People may be concerned, but they're not sure. They don't know what to do, or maybe they just miss the warning signs completely. Other forms of indirect leakage. Van Ramsey told someone he was plotting an evil day. Caleb Sharp gave notes to some buddies saying he was going to do something stupid that would get him jailed or killed. Again, Brian Oliver warned his friends, "Don't go to school because something bad was going to happen." He didn't state he was going to carry out a school shooting, just something bad. So whether it's direct or indirect, anything that suggests a possible safety concern needs to be passed along to the threat assessment team at the school so they can investigate it. It may be a false alarm, it may be a joke, but we don't know that if nobody investigates. So that's a quick look at threats and leakage. Then I mentioned there's attack-related behavior. And this includes anything that shows someone is planning and preparing for an attack. And this is important because it's one thing to think about it, it's another thing to talk about it. But if you're engaging in attack-related behavior, it means it's not just a fantasy or a thought, you're trying to make it happen at this point. So this is particularly concerning if there's any evidence that someone's making a hit list, planning out how and where and when to carry out the attack, conducting surveillance on the school, the different entrances, if there's a school resource officer, if there's any pattern to the officer's behaviors, if he or she takes lunch at a certain time, all of that is planning and preparing, getting their hands on their weapons, practicing with the weapons, and so on. So any kind of attack-related behavior is critical to identify and investigate. Now, besides leakage and attack-related behavior, there's what I call evidence of imminence. Not all warning signs are equal. For example, something could be really vague. A student might say, "Sometimes I feel like just getting a gun from somewhere and going on a rampage." At this point, he doesn't have a gun. Maybe he doesn't know where to get a gun. Maybe he's never even fired a gun. And it's just a feeling and it may pass. It doesn't mean we're not concerned about this person, but there's no imminent danger based on that statement. In other cases, the statement might be something completely unrealistic, like I'm going to blow up the whole county. Again, it doesn't mean we're not concerned, but that's beyond capability of a kid to do. That's less concerning than something that's both specific and achievable and realistic, like kid who says, I stole my dad's shotgun and Friday at noon I'm getting revenge in the cafeteria. That is a very imminent danger. So just to follow up on this concept, we're going to take a look at it in a little more detail. So the more specific details, the more imminent the danger. As I said, realistic, specific, and achievable are key things to look for. And if there's a time for the attack that's been determined, the place, the method, is it going to be a shooting, a stabbing, bombing, arson, whatever? And does the person have access to the means? So they have the guns or the bombs or whatever they need to carry out the attack. If all four things are in place, that's a very imminent risk. So how might these things manifest if we come across student writings, either in journals or posts online? What might that look like? Well, we're going to take a look at some grandiose fantasies of violence from a 16-year-old high school student. So his attack is going to be like the LA riots, the Oklahoma bombing, World War II, Vietnam, all mixed together. That's quite a tall order. Obviously, there's no reality to those fantasies. He's just going off into grandiose visions of himself as a destroyer. We will hijack a hell of a lot of bombs and crash a plane into New York City. I have a goal to destroy as much as possible. I want to burn the world. I say kill mankind, no one should survive. Now, we might well be very concerned about this student, but none of these things are realistic and achievable. But let's take a look at another passage of his writings. And by the way, he was 16 when he started writing these things, but he continued writing for the next year or two. And here's a passage of concern. First, we will go to the house of, and he names two specific people, in the morning before school starts. We go in, we silently kill each inhabitant and then pin down the two people. Then take our sweet time pissing on them, spitting on them, and just torturing the hell out of them. Once we're done there, we set time bombs to burn the houses down. Then get totally prepared, and during a lunch, we go in and park in our spots. With sunglasses on, we start carrying in all of our bags of terrorism and anarchism shit into our table. Being very casual and silent about it. It's all for a science, band, English project or something. And we sit down, play some pump up music, light a $50 stogie, and get ready to start throwing out the first wave of crickets, little bombs I had made. Then we light them and throw them as far as we can. Then I open fire. Then if we can, we go upstairs and go to each classroom and pick off fuckers at our will. Now, this passage concerns me a lot more than passages about killing mankind, because this is realistic. This is doable. Now, he doesn't announce the date of this attack, but there's a lot of methodical planning that's gone into this. They know the exact sequence of events that they're going to carry out. Now, this passage and all the other ones on the previous slide was written by Eric Harris, one of the two Columbine killers. What's very disturbing is this was on his website, and this was seen by some people. So as in so many cases, there were clear warning signs ahead of time that could have led to an intervention, but didn't. Now, what's also striking about this is this was written more than a year before the attack. So this suggests an imminent attack, but as I said, there's no date mentioned. This was actually very early in the planning for what eventually became the Columbine massacre. And over time, they gave up the idea of going to someone's house before school. They dropped that, but they did carry in bombs and so on. But what's concerning, as I said, is this is realistic and achievable compared to things like this that were impossible to achieve. So even, as I said, we might be concerned about this person, this passage raises the level of concern. We're going to take a similar look at someone else who wrote, all women must be quarantined like the plague they are, so that they can be used in a manner that actually benefits a civilized society. In order to carry this out, there must exist a new and powerful type of government under the control of one divine ruler, such as myself. The first strike against women will be to quarantine all of them in concentration camps. At these camps, the vast majority of the female population will be deliberately starved to death. Now, again, this is a grandiose fantasy. It's impossible to achieve. If we came across this writing, we could certainly investigate this and speak to this young man, but this is not about to happen. In contrast, here's another passage from the same person. The first people I would have to kill are my two housemates to secure the entire apartment for myself as my personal torture and killing chamber. The sorority with the most beautiful girls is Alpha Phi sorority. I know exactly where their house is, and I've sat outside it in my car to stalk them many times. I will sneak into their house at around 9 p.m. on the day of retribution, just before all of the partying starts, and slaughter every single one of them with my guns and knives. If I have time, I will set their whole house on fire. I will quickly get into the SUV before the police arrive, assuming they would arrive within 3 minutes. I will then make my way to Del Playa, splattering as many of my enemies as I can with the SUV and shooting anyone I don't splatter. Now, compared to the fantasy of quarantining all women on planet Earth and so on, this, again, is a very methodically thought out plan of destruction. And the perpetrator, in this case, Elliot Rodger, pretty much carried this out as he described it. He killed the people he lived with. He went to the sorority, but he could not get in. They would not open the door to him. So he fired some shots, tried to set it on fire, got in his car, drove into people, ran people over, fired at people as he drove. He carried this out to the best of his ability. So again, this is a very different type of concern because it's specific and achievable. Even though he does not here provide the date he's going to do this, he's named it the day of retribution. He's planning this very carefully so that this is much more imminent because it's realistic. It's something he can do, and he's put a lot of thought into it. So quickly, I'm going to look at some other examples. Michael Carneal, the 14-year-old boy I mentioned before, warned kids in the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving that something big was going to happen on the Monday after Thanksgiving. And at this school, before classes started, there was a group of kids who had a little prayer circle in the school lobby every morning. He tells people, stay away from the prayer group. It's going to involve blood and guts. And Monday's the day of reckoning. And wouldn't it be cool to walk down the hall and kill people? And at least 5 students saw Michael in school with a gun in the weeks leading up to the attack. And someone heard him say the hypocrites in the prayer group were going to go down. So there's a whole lot of leakage and a whole lot more than this leading up to the attack. But if we view it not just as leakage, but through the lens of the evidence of imminence, do we know when the attack's going to happen? Yes, Monday morning after Thanksgiving. Do we know where it's going to happen? Yes, the lobby. What kind of attack is it going to be? A shooting. Do we know if he has access? Yes, we do. Kids have seen him in school with guns. We even know who the intended victims are. And with leakage to maybe a dozen different students, no one reported anything. And on the Monday morning after Thanksgiving, Michael Carneal went to the school lobby, fired 8 shots, hit 8 students, killing 3. Again, so much leakage and evidence of imminence, if only people had reported it. And going back to Johnson and Golden, whom I mentioned earlier, the 13 and 11-year-old boy who committed an attack together. Johnson was engaging in a lot of leakage for weeks. People are going to die, he's going to kill people. Girls who broke up with him, he's going to kill them. If you cut school tomorrow, he's going to bring a gun. You're going to find out if you live and die. fifth period tomorrow. If you go outside, you're going to die, going on a killing spree, and so on. So again, for several weeks leading up to this incident, Johnson is engaging in a great deal of leakage. Drew Golden told a girl that the plan was they're going to pull a fire alarm. Everyone's going to exit the building. Golden and Johnson are going to have a sniper position up on a hill overlooking the building and gun people down. But then a couple days later, he told her, "Nah, we're not really going to do that." But then at some point, Drew Golden, again, he's 11 years old, is about 4 feet tall, stood on a table in the cafeteria and announced, "You're all going to die." Again, all this leakage and evidence of imminence. It's going to be tomorrow, fifth period, outside the school, going to be a shooting. They have a plan. Both boys are known to have guns in their homes. And we know something about the victims. But again, with all this leakage for weeks, no one reported it. The two boys did exactly what they said they were going to do, pulled the alarm, people evacuated. This 11 and 13-year-old boy shot 15 people, killing 5. So the obvious question is, with all this leakage so often available, why don't people report it? So in my latest book called Warning Signs, I have a whole chapter called Barriers to Action. So I'm just going to touch on some things here. In the aftermath of these attacks, we often see comments like this. "I thought he was bragging like always. I didn't think he was going to hurt anybody really. I thought he was just talking big and bad. Nobody took him seriously." I mean, a lot of kids might say stuff like that, but they never do it. "He laughed when he said it. You couldn't really take him serious. I was a pretty good friend of his, and I knew that he was a jokester, and he'd say something like that just to get attention, but I never thought he'd do it." And this goes back to where I started, the idea of stereotypes, or we know who's going to do this, who's likely to do this. Students just did not take it seriously, even when they heard explicit leakage. Well, why not? Well, I think there's a lot of denial, and that could be with students, staff, parents. People still think it can't happen in our town or our school, or "I know the boy, I know the family, he would never do it. He has good parents, he's not the kind of kid." There's all kinds of rationalizations people use to not take action, even when the warning signs are staring them in the face. And people may be afraid. They don't want to get the student angry at them. They don't want to get them in trouble. They think maybe it's overreacting. It was only one comment. Maybe I should wait. Hesitation is dangerous when lives are at stake. And sometimes people just don't want to get involved. Or they think, well, he said it, but then he said he didn't mean it, so I guess I don't have to report him. Well, he always said strange things and we don't need to worry about it. Or, well, he's been saying it for so long, he hasn't done it, I guess he won't. But repeated leakage is not a reason to dismiss the concern. It's a reason to take it more seriously, because what perpetrators do is they talk about it and talk about it and talk about it some more, and then finally they do it. And some people might think, if you're going to commit a major crime, if you're going to commit mass murder, you're not going to tell the world because you don't want to get caught. But this is not a crime people expect to get away with. People do announce it. They tell their friends about it. They put it on social media. They post it online. People do announce it. And staff may be afraid of stigmatizing the student, and they don't want to overreact and criminalize student behavior. They don't want to, feed the school to prison pipeline. They don't want parents angry at them, and so on. And one issue is they think they're not allowed to discuss student behavior because of the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. Federal law that governs student privacy. But FERPA does not get in the way of doing threat assessment. And the U.S. Department of Education has published a pamphlet to clarify that point. It basically says FERPA allows schools to take key steps to maintain school safety. Teachers overhearing student threats are allowed and should share that information. That's not part of the official student record. That's not covered by FERPA, and so on. So for all kinds of reasons, students, parents, and school personnel may not share information that could save lives. So again, we need to do a lot of education in our schools and communities to promote better reporting of safety concerns. Now, people might also wonder, well, what if I'm wrong? What if it is a joke, a misunderstanding, or he said it, but he didn't really mean it? You know, there's no harm done in bringing a student in for a conversation. And threat assessment is not about punishing students. It's not about suspending them, expelling them, or arresting them. In fact, threat assessment decreases the amount of punitive responses, such as suspension, expulsion, and arrests, because it's an evidence-based model. So if you just bring a student in and have a conversation, hey, we heard you and so had a little altercation in the hallway and words were exchanged, tell us what happened. Who else was there to witness it? Maybe all that is a conversation and there's no evidence it was any real threat of danger, and it's done. There's no harm done by just checking on something like that. And even if a student didn't mean a homicidal threat, literally, it could be a student who's really struggling and could benefit from some kind of intervention. Could be depressed, could be suicidal, could have been traumatized somewhere in or outside of school. Looking into a student who may be in crisis, even if it's not a homicidal threat, is still something that we should be doing to support our students. And the flip side is, if we have evidence of a potential attack and we don't do something about it, lives are at stake. You know, people may die, whole communities could be devastated. And think about all these students who heard direct announcements of impending attacks and didn't do anything, and then their friends and teachers have been killed. That's an awfully heavy burden to live the rest of your life with, knowing that if you had spoken up, people would still be alive. You know, no one should have to live with that kind of a burden. So in the balance between reporting and maybe it turning out to be false, or not reporting and maybe it turns out to be true and people die, you know, we need to encourage people to just speak up. Now, I just want to emphasize one thing. When doing threat assessment, you know, anyone can lie, but some perpetrators are psychopaths, and psychopaths can be remarkably deceptive, and not just lie, but charm people as they're lying. So anyone involved in threat assessment needs to be aware of just how skilled a psychopath can be. And I think I'm going to have to shorten this section due to time constraints, but I'm going to do the first piece of it. So going back to Eric Harris, one of the two Columbine killers, he knew he was very good at being deceitful. If I have to cheat and lie to everyone, then that's fine. I have confidence in my ability to deceive people. And speaking of school administrators, he said, I could convince them that I'm going to climb Mount Everest or I have a twin brother growing out of my back. I can make you believe anything. And to illustrate this, 15 months before the attack, Harris and Klebold were arrested for breaking into an electrician's van. They got caught and had probation. As part of his probation was to write an apology letter to the van owner. So Eric wrote, I strongly feel I owe you an apology and explanation. I am truly sorry for what I have done. He also wrote an essay about the experience for a teacher at school. And the gist of the essay was, I can't believe I did something so stupid, but you know, I've really learned my lesson. And as a result, I'm going to be a better person from now on. Teacher was really impressed and said, you know, Eric, it's not one action that makes a person. I would trust you in a heartbeat. But what was Eric writing in the privacy of his own journal? Isn't America supposed to be the land of the free? How come if I'm free, I can't deprive a stupid fucking dumb shit from his possessions if he leaves them sitting in the front seat of his fucking van out in plain sight and in the middle of fucking nowhere on a Friday fucking day night? Fucker should be shot. As far as Eric was concerned, it's the van driver's fault for being stupid. And if this is the land of the free, why doesn't he, Eric, have the freedom to steal the guy's stuff. And Eric himself now feels like a victim of injustice because he's supposed to be living in the land of the free. No guilt, no remorse, but very convincing. Teacher said, "I would trust you in a heartbeat." Parent of a friend called Eric the perfect little gentleman. Teachers loved him. Look at report card comments. Positive attitude and good cooperation, strong interest in participation. Eric is doing awesome. Great kid to have in class. The probation officer, who had experience with juvenile delinquents, let Eric off probation early because he was doing so well and was such a great kid. Really nice young man, seems responsible and remorseful. Prognosis, good. Eric is a very bright young man who is likely to succeed in life. And when was that written? February 99. The attack was April 99. They had been planning it since the previous spring. Eric was very good at conning people. To show you what was really going on behind the scenes, though, somewhat behind the scenes, because this was posted on his website. No, we'll skip that. I'm just going to skip ahead to the conclusion in the interest of time. You know, all schools should have threat assessment teams. A growing number of states now mandate threat assessment teams in every school, but most states don't do that. And even for those states that do mandate it, it's one thing to say you have to have one. It's another thing to make sure they're really up and running and effective and well-trained and know what to do. And we need anonymous tip lines to make it easy for students, parents, or staff to come forward with safety concerns. And we need solid training for the school staff, but also for students and families about warning signs and how to report them and what's appropriate to report and what isn't supposed to be reported on the tip line and so on. But we also need to talk about the barriers to action and how easy it is to think, we don't really need to report it, or he's not the kind of kid to do such a thing. And that goes back to the stereotypes and misconceptions. And in terms of my books, these are the 3 titles. And again, my website has a massive amount of information on all kinds of aspects relating to school safety and school perpetrators of violence. So that's the presentation. And now we're going to see what kind of questions have come in.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter, for that information. I am just going to start with a few questions that we got from folks prior to this session and work our way up to some of the Q&A questions we're getting from the live audience as well. So there's so much in your workshop from, you know, the warning signs and the various types and stereotypes and misunderstandings. I think actually I'm going to start with our audience question, or one that just came in because it seems really resonant. It says, there seems to be a common thread of misogyny across these manifestos. How do we combat that?
Well, first, let me comment on the issue of misogyny. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of school shooters do have hostility towards girls or women. Sometimes it's against a specific person who rejected them, like we saw with Luke Woodham. Other times, like Elliot Rodger, it's against women in general. How we combat that is a big question. You know, I wish I had a simple answer. I don't know that there is a simple answer. But in terms of education, developing programming in our schools about males and females and stereotypes and, you know, relationships and sexuality, trying to get beyond certain stereotypes. Also helping students with social skills and dating. I think there's a lot that could be said if certain perpetrators had been more successful with their dating attempts or with relationships. maybe they wouldn't have committed their attacks. So I think there's a number of different things we can do that's really beyond the scope of my expertise, but I think it's a critical issue that, we as a nation should be addressing.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Who should be a part of those school threat assessment teams?
These teams should be what's called a multidisciplinary team. And the makeup is going to vary from school to school because not every school has the same personnel. For example, if you have a school psychologist, that person should be on the team, but you might not have a school psychologist. Mm-hmm. Generally, you want a cross-section of disciplines, administration. If you have any kind of mental health personnel, psychologists, social worker, counselors. If you have a security person, whether it's security or school resource officer, if you have a nurse, your IT person could be a critical person because threats may come in through text messages. You might need someone who can explore social media. There's a whole subcategory called digital threat assessment. So someone who's very skilled with IT could play a critical role. You might want a faculty representative and so on. So there's no required list of members, but it should be that multidisciplinary team.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's kind of at least two other right now of that threat assessment and then the response to the threat questions that are coming in. And one of them says that my district suspends any students that make a threat. And they've been talking about why that isn't always the best practice. So the question this person's asking is, what do you suggest we tell administrators who want to suspend for any and every threat, even if the threat assessment team says it's transient?
My phrase for that is punishment is not prevention. Mm. And I address this issue again in my book called Warning Signs, because there's a chapter on threat assessment and sort of some do's and don'ts. And if all you're doing is using punishment such as suspension or expulsion, and you don't do a threat assessment, if you don't investigate or you don't put a safety plan in place, you're not doing anything to prevent the attack. And there have been students who have been suspended, and they come back later the same day with a gun and shoot the people who suspended them, because nothing was put in place in terms of maintaining safety. So the key phrase I use is punishment is not prevention. If anything, sometimes getting suspended may make kids more angry. They may be more fed up with the school. If then they get punished by their parents for being suspended, now they're getting a double whammy. If they may be out of sight of supervision, if their parents are working and there's nobody home, they could be gathering guns or bombs and nobody even knows. So again, if all you're doing is suspending, that has no preventive value at all. And that doesn't mean you never suspend, but you need to make sure there's good adult supervision at home if you're going to suspend someone. And that period of suspension needs to be used effectively to conduct your threat assessment investigation, to come up with a safety plan, because if the student's just suspended, he or she is coming back, maybe just a few days. What's going to be different now? What's going to be in place to maintain safety? So a safety plan could include things like, are we going to check in daily with this student before he goes to classes? Is somebody going to pat him down to see if he has a weapon? Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's been implemented because schools are that afraid. Is he going to have any academic supports if part of his anger is because he's failing classes? Is he going to have any mental health supports? Do we need to change classes because he's in a class with several kids who are constantly picking on him? So if you're going to suspend, you have to make sure he's being supervised, and you need to use that time effectively to carry out your threat assessment and create your safety plan.
That's great. I think maybe asking you to say a little bit more on some of those safety plans. There's another question about, should there be mandatory minimum requirements, therapy sessions? So it sounds a little bit like the question and where you're getting to is what are, if punishment isn't the answer, what are some of the innovative interventions once a threat assessment has been made and there is an elevated concern of credibility of that threat?
Couple things just to step back a bit. Based on some data, over 90% of threats that are investigated are transient threats. They're false alarms. So there may be nothing that needs to be done. So in most cases where there's a threat made, there's no real serious danger. So you wouldn't even need a safety plan. Now, the type of interventions you put in place really vary. And I know people like specific answers, but often the answer is, well, it depends, because has the person broken the law? If he's got illegal guns and bombs, he's broken the law, law enforcement gets involved. And once law enforcement is involved, maybe they can get a search warrant and search the house and find all kinds of other information and might discover that what was known by the school is the tip of the iceberg, and this student may end up being incarcerated. But in other cases, maybe no law has been broken, and the student's struggling and is depressed and maybe suicidal on top of being homicidal. So you might really need to put some mental health supports in place, and that could include both in the community or at the school. But sometimes outpatient treatment may not be enough. I got into doing this work because when Columbine happened, I was a psychologist at a psychiatric hospital for children and adolescents, and 10 days after Columbine, a potential school shooter was admitted to our facility, and I was assigned the case to evaluate him. That's how I got involved doing this work, based on 10 days after Columbine. So I was seeing a pretty steady stream of potential school shooters for years after that. So depending on the severity of what's been discovered, it may not just be referring for counseling, it may be getting the student into a psychiatric hospital or long-term residential treatment program. But again, in most cases, that won't be necessary. So it really does depend on the severity of what's been discovered, how much is pointing in a mental health direction, how much is pointing more in a legal direction, or it could be both. Laws have been broken, but someone also has some serious mental health issues. So I think teams just have to be creative in terms of what they come up with that would allow this student to safely return to their school.
That's wonderful, really helpful. I think fear can kick in so highly that, the innovative interventions, innovation just shuts down because we're in that reaction mode. And along that thread, are there reports or documents that schools should use to sort of close out or be doing a threat assessment that could maybe provide some recommendations? Another question along those lines was, can you share out an example of good threat assessment? And it sounds like too, if you have a story or two where a threat assessment prevented a school shooting or potentially, intervened, that would feel very heartening to people to hear right now as well.
Okay, potential school shootings or school attacks are often prevented. And we typically don't hear about them because it's a non-event. So we're probably doing a much better job at detecting and preventing these incidents than anyone is aware of. And that's the good news. Now, there are some people who track that to the best of their ability, but if it doesn't make the media, it's awfully hard to track. But just to let you know, again, going back to my book, Warning Signs, the first chapter consists of a number of scenarios in which people saw something, took action, and prevented an attack. And every chapter after that ends with a little thumbnail sketch of an incident in which a school attack was thwarted. And I put those in there, one, to give people hope, but also to show just how effective this can be. It may be as simple as making one phone call, and that's all it takes to get the ball rolling. And then the police or the school threat assessment team jumps in, they investigate, they intervene, and lives are saved. So that does happen. I've collected a number of incidents. There's a database called the Averted School Violence Database, sponsored by the Institute has changed its name. It used to be Police Foundation. Now I think it's National Policing Institute. But there's a report on my website on the prevention page that looks at averted school attacks and what we can learn about them in terms of how they were prevented, who saw what evidence, how that was reported, and so on. So people should know that threat assessment is very effective. See something, say something is a great motto. It does save lives, and we have, many incidents to document that.
That's great. It's nice to hear too the affirmation that sometimes those easy see something, say something are effective and important to be saying, even when they start to feel cliche coming out of our mouths. When we've said it a bunch of times, especially as educators, that repetitiveness is like, is this effectual?
Yeah. I mean, just to give you one example that I have in my book, because this did not involve the police discovering something or the school threat assessment team discovering something. There was a mother attending a girls' soccer game at a high school. She's sitting in the stadium. A couple rows in front of her, there's two boys talking about guns and eventually talking about their upcoming school shooting. Without them knowing it, she used her cell phone and took photos of those two boys and then sent them to the school resource officer, who quickly identified them, brought them in, interviewed them, and they confessed to their plan. It was that simple, but a woman attending her daughter's soccer game took the initiative to do something about it. And if she hadn't, again, that could have been a school we'd be reading about in the news.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great story of going against sometimes our socialized idea that it's none of our business, right? Or something that we see or hear in public is none of our business, and making that our business because community care is so vital.
Yeah, my ongoing motto in the book is we're all on duty.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I end every chapter with one of those little incidents in which someone took it upon themselves to make that phone call or to pass along some information, because we all have a part to play in keeping our community safe.
Absolutely. I love that. So that sets us up very nicely for this another question from somebody in the audience who is asking, how do you feel the best way to address school administrators or teachers' concerns about presenting this type of info to kids themselves? It sounds like that teaching the warning signs to look for has stirred up some concern that all we're doing is arming potential school shooters with things to do to avoid detection, or that it will scare kids too much. And so they're wondering if you have any tips, like what's best practice? What are the tips for addressing these concerns?
I don't have a program I can recommend that is doing that kind of work in terms of educating students. So I don't know, someone may be out there doing that. I don't have something I can recommend as here's the program that's doing this well. In terms of frightening students, if you keep in mind that so many schools, including elementary schools, are doing active shooter drills, which can be traumatizing, not just to the students, but to the staff themselves, because sometimes these are done very realistically. And if we're traumatizing people, that's not the way to do it. But telling them, if your friend talks about bringing a gun to school, report that, is a lot less traumatizing than acting out having a gunman in the building and people being shot and killed. So I think students are already being exposed to so much in the realm of school safety that this would be fairly minimal compared to active shooter drills. And it should not be explicit or violent. It should be age appropriate. And the basic message is, if you're concerned about safety or you're concerned about your friend, here's all you do. And students do use anonymous tip lines. And like in Pennsylvania, where I am, thousands of calls come in a year. Very few have to do with a school shooting. A lot of them are students calling because they're worried about their friends. My friend seems depressed, he or she has been cutting, or they're suicidal, or they were recently sexually assaulted, or they're getting into drugs. Kids are looking out for each other. And anonymous tip lines is a way to do that. So as long as we're having tip lines in use, students should be taught, here's what's appropriate to report. That doesn't mean you talk about school shootings in any kind of gory detail, but you make it about safety and looking out for each other.
Thank you for that. Two questions here, kind of back to back. Are school shootings by non-students trending? And in light of the Nashville shooting, not being a student or an active student, a previous student, it sounds like on CNN, when public commenter suggested that the Nashville shooter was mimicking the actions of young male school shooters. And this is based on a video that's been released. So aside from is non-student shooting perpetrators going up, could you also talk about if there's any phenomenon that you're seeing that of emulation of other school shooters or sort of copycat crimes is also how they say it here?
Okay, yeah, two different questions. I don't think the non-student school shootings are trending. We've seen them before. And I can think of one back in 1989 where 23 or 24-year-old man went back to former elementary school and opened fire. That happened again in 2011. That was what Sandy Hook was in 2012. We've seen these along the way. Even among school shootings, it's a rarity. So I don't know, or I don't think we have evidence that this is something that's increasing. It's something that's, like I said, occurred for decades, but it's always been a distinct minority within the school shooting realm. Now, regarding what's variously called copycat or contagion effects, we certainly see that. Whether the Nashville shooter was copying someone, I don't know. I haven't seen that confirmed. But many, many school shooters and other types of attackers find role models. And I've got some documents on my website about this. One's called Role Models, Contagion, and Copycats. And in fact, I have a graphic showing how many perpetrators have cited Columbine in one or more ways as an influence or a reference point. And I followed that for 20 years. And there's several dozen perpetrators and several dozen more would-be perpetrators who were, quote, inspired by Columbine or took Harrison Klebold as role models whose attacks were thwarted. So more than any other people at this point, Eric Harris or the two Columbine killers are cited by subsequent school shooters and other attackers. Other people have been cited as well, particularly the Virginia Tech and Sandy Hook perpetrators, because they also committed major attacks. And sometimes these people are cited as role models. Other times people very clearly articulate they got a lot of fame. How do you go from being nobody to being somebody? You get a gun and you kill people. And multiple perpetrators have put that very clearly. They feel like they're nobody. So-and-so got international fame in an instant. I'm going to do that too. So we certainly do see imitation from one perpetrator to the next.
Okay, thank you. Are there suggestions? So let's say that a threat assessment team feels like it's a credible concern. But parents aren't taking those threats seriously or that assessment seriously. What do people do? What are suggestions for that?
Well, the school, I guess, has a lot of leeway in terms of what it puts in place in the way of a safety plan. It certainly is problematic if the parents are not compliant or will not work with the school on that. but you could still have someone meeting with the student routinely, even daily. You could put in, as I said, academic supports, mental health supports as necessary. You could look at class assignment to keep him or her away from certain peers. There's still things the school can do, but also monitor the situation and see if it escalates, if you gather more evidence, and if you can get the police involved. Because again, once the police are involved, that changes things, because they can do things that, school officials and mental health professionals can't do. They can get the search warrant and go in the house and maybe find guns and bombs and journals that the parents did not know were there. So it's important to not just have a safety plan in place, but to continue to monitor the situation. And that may mean following the kid's social media, checking in with his peers, checking in with his teachers. Teachers often see and hear things in class or see assignments that in hindsight have been clear warning signs, but often nobody asked them. So including teachers in your threat assessment is important, because they may be seeing and reading things from the student in question that if no one reaches out to them, threat assessment team is not going to hear about.
It's a great point. That's a great point. And again, this is that see something, say something, and sort of that community, wraparound of seeing one person from all their complex views, and we all get sort of different insights to people at different times. So friends and teachers, counselors, a random parent in the stands, all get different snippets of a complex individual than parents always get. So that's a beautiful reminder, too, that our response can't just rely on one person or one group of people. So this is a wonderful question for us to start to wrap up with. In your estimation, Dr. Langman, is there something crucial missing in how we discuss school shootings?
I guess it depends on who we are. We as a nation, or, does we mean people who work in schools? I'm not sure. Again, I'm going to go back to where I started, thinking we know what a school shooter looks like. I think that is very dangerous. That's why I've been highlighting that. Taking warning signs seriously, no matter who they come from, having the threat assessment team in place. I think most schools still don't have threat assessment teams in place. I've talked to some people, and I mentioned threat assessment, and they say, oh no, we got it covered. We've got our lockdown drills and emergency response. And it's like, well, that's good that you have that, but that's not prevention, So there's still, I think, a mindset that either they don't know about threat assessment or they don't see the need for it. So I guess there's a lot of conversation still to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I am going to screen share with our participants here for a moment and ask folks, can everyone see my screen, hopefully? Ask participants to take a moment to scan the QR code if possible. I'm also going to put the link in case scanning that right now is not easy or possible for you. I am going to put the link up. I put it somewhere for myself. Hold on really quick. Got it. Okay, I'm going to put the link just in case for folks who maybe, like I said, are not able to access the QR code on the screen. So please do take a moment to offer some feedback or let us know what your additional supports are. I am so grateful to Dr. Langman for this. I definitely want to encourage all of our participants to practice a little self-care. It is intense to hear the voices of people who go on to exact atrocities that impact the victims of that violence the most, but always has a ripple effect into our communities. It has had a ripple effect into just what it means to be an educator working in a building of education every day, when this feels like a threat that maybe when you started your career wasn't always there. And so then to hear the voices of individuals sharing their vitriol or their hate or their fear and their intentions can be very overwhelming. So I'm hoping that each of you has something that you can do tonight, a breathing exercise, laying in your bed, a nice evening walk, reaching out to people tomorrow to talk about the gravity and share how you're feeling. You are welcome to, again, fill out our survey and let us know what you're needing or what would be helpful and supportive. We will be sending post-workshop resources to follow up via email in the coming days. So if you have questions for the NEST team, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And again, I want to just end with that on behalf of the entire NEST team, we are so thankful for Dr. Langman for joining us, for being so generous with sharing his knowledge and insights. We're incredibly grateful to each of you for your time, for asking really compelling questions that help bring all of the research and knowledge that Dr. Langman has into practice in your own areas of work and life in general. So thank you. We're so glad you could be with us today. And I will stay in this space until all participants have left. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Langman.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.